But the trouble with this structure is that this 7 billion or so a year is just unsustainable and it defies gravity. And I'm going to show you a chart that should make Greece in comparison look like a model of complete financial probity. It's a bit complicated, this, but it just shows you, and this comes from an ORR document of 2 years ago. This information is out in the open. It shows you the opening debt each year that Network Rail has. So it starts in 09-10 with 21 billion, and by the time it's finished in 13-14, go to the bottom right-hand corner, and it's reached 31 billion. Now that's serious money, very serious money. And the trouble is, you can see where Network Rail's problems are. Its income every year fails completely to match its expenditure. And it also, the level of government grant it's receiving is about 3 billion a year, with the balance coming from passengers and freight services, is quite frankly it's just not enough. But of course, what is also extremely worrying, as you can see, is that interest rates are now increasing as a burden on the company to a level whereby 13-14, 1.7 billion of the entire budget is just going on paying the interest. And remember, this interest is only kept at this level because the government is underwriting the debt. There is no commercial entity on the planet would survive this structure without just going bust almost before it started the control period. And this is the sort of figures I think Alan Budd is going to look at, because this isn't a business. And also, one must have very, very significant doubts about what's happening inside this business represents in any way at all value for money. Which brings me on to the openness and transparency issues. I think as an absolute priority, the Office of Budget Responsibility, or whoever, or Phil Hammond, Secretary of State, must insist that Network Rail's books become completely open and transparent. Many of you work in local authorities, and I know, and I'm very impressed the way that many local authorities have made their commercial transactions open and transparent. And I think Network Rail should do as well. And I think once these figures are seen, I believe all sorts of interesting things will start to happen. Because clearly, I think some of the costs and some of the costing methodologies inside Network Rail are frankly unsustainable. There's a real challenge there. But if we don't do something, 30 billion of debt for the railway industry is just not possible in an industry that's so relatively small. And actually, it could stultify growth, and it will certainly stultify the passenger experience. This, of course, is not a member of Network Rail's board. It is, in fact, Eric Honecker, who you may remember was the boss of the DDR in the 70s and the 80s. And again, he kept hidden books, of course. The DDR always used to tell us how brilliantly they were doing. At one time, they even claimed they'd caught up with Great Britain economically. In fact, every year till about the mid-80s, before they abandoned it, they used to have the books, a real set of books shown to the leading membership of the SED to see what was going on. I think it's no good for us, for Network Rail's bosses, to tell us the organisation's fine, it's in control, when I don't think it is. And I don't think it can be acting like the DDR. Right, the third bullet is harnessing technology to reduce cost. Now, I do not underestimate the problems in the railway industry. It's a very complex one, very integrated. It's got layer upon layers of technologies, some going back anything up to 100 years, some of them actually quite cutting edge, and keeping it all meshed together and producing a safe, reliable railway out of this complete jumble of technologies is extremely difficult. But actually, too often, I think, as an industry, we've not been smart enough. And it's very interesting. High-speed rail, HS2, led by Sir David Rowlands, who is a great guy, but he's a deeply conservative civil servant. And Andrew McNaughton, professor, and a board member of a senior member of Network Rail's team, even they said in the report, when you get to section 4, that basically the way we go about our business of infrastructure in this country, particularly railway infrastructure, is just hopelessly uneconomic. And those are from two very measured individuals who not given to hyperbole, or certainly Rowlands isn't. And we've got structures that are somehow costing fantastically more than they do even in Europe And when you compare them to wider global standards of infrastructure and operation, our cost base just seems crazy. Now, there's 4 big ideas in this that I think we have really got to look at to make sure that this particular silver bullet works. The first is the BRIC technology paradigm. BRIC, of course, Brazil, Russia, India, China. These are countries who are coming into a market very competitively. They want to win. They're also coming from markets where actually money is much shorter supply, resources are much shorter supply than our own. So it's extremely interesting technological ideas are emerging from these countries, and all of them have the key component that they're cheap, that they're very focused, and they're very imaginative solutions. You know, you use your mobile phone to do all sorts of things which we in the West wouldn't worry about using a mobile phone because we can actually got other bits of machinery that do it. But when you're strapped for cash and your market's not that well off, you do look for some bright ideas. And I think we're too cocooned in the West, and I think the railway industries of the West are too cocooned in just doing things expensively just like we always did, while the rest of the world is changing dramatically around us. And the rest of the world's railways are changing as well. China and India's railways are emerging, I think, as some of the most interesting technological idea centres on the planet, and we ought to be listening to them and importing these technologies into our own railway industry, because I'm sure they could bring costs absolutely tumbling down. The next thing, we must have intelligent consultants. I think we've had enough of consultants who just do what their brief tells them to do and don't even ask questions. We ended up with the complete shambles of the Intercity Express project, which was a grotesquely overspecified project. And I think the consultants involved should have asked themselves the question, are we producing something that makes any sense, or are we just taking a paycheck from the government for doing a job? And I think there's some really fundamental heart-searching inside the consultancy industry before we go much further. But that must be backed by intelligent customers. It's no good people, the government in particular, and I think Network Rail as well, asking for things and then not dealing with the customers properly. I think some of the strategies inside Network Rail for procurement and project management are weak. I think some of the strategies inside the Department for Transport for project management and procurement are extremely weak. And so the customer has got to become a darn sight more intelligent. And finally, what is very important to the railway industries across Europe are actually relatively small in proportion of transport share and mix. There are huge technological changes going on in the motor industry, about which the railway industry has often been extremely chary. Doesn't like the idea of roads, they're nasty. But you've got to look at what's happening in things in computer management of road systems and the whole sustainability sets of arguments to see how they can be imported into the railways. And I think the railway industry occasionally has got to swallow its pride and say, actually, things are happening better outside the industry. Let's get it inside. Now, those are the 3 silver bullets. You will note I've not spoken at all about vertical integration, whether TOC should be reorganised, be more TOCs or less, or whether Network Rail should be broken into little bits. Because I think once you've fired the 3 silver bullets and you start to see things emerging, the structure will then emerge that will handle it right. And I think we'll look back at the Lone Ranger and think, hey, he was a good guy. He had a good way of managing things. Thank you very much indeed.